From the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
All right, Ben, let's get to the news of the day, and that is John Elway and Aaron Rodgers. Now, John Elway, just in case people haven't been listening or hiding under a rock or something, no longer the GM. I still see that once in a while on Twitter. Want to let people know, John Elway's not the GM. Okay.
John Elway's also not in the building much. He lives in California.
Yes. Just throwing that out there.
Just so people know.
There's a report out there that John Elway went golfing with Aaron Rodgers.
Well, let's start. Let's start with
you can tell me. I'm just literally setting up what's out there, and then you can parse through and tell us all the parts that are not true and whatever. I'm just saying there was a report out there that the two went golfing, and there was another report out there that they played poker afterwards. But I want to get to the parts that you know of this story and what's fact and what's fiction.
What I will tell you is that John Elway and Aaron Rodgers did not play golf together, okay? There was nothing scheduled for them to play golf together. They did not play golf together. They bumped into each other on the same golf course on the 18th hole. They bumped into each other as Elway was walking off, Aaron Rodgers was getting on, he was getting his group, and they bumped into each other. There was a handshake, they conversed for a few minutes, and that was it. This happened way back before the draft. This was in February. So it went a couple weeks ago. This is back in February. All right? As far as any poker game goes, that's ludicrous. That didn't happen. They had a casual conversation. John Elway barely remembered it, honestly, when this got brought up and people started sniffing around this thing, calling the Broncos. John Elway barely remembered it. He had George Payton had no clue, didn't even know about it. And so there was a bump into each other. It'd be the same. It'd be like me going jogging at Wash Park, and I happened to see John Elway, and then telling people that John Elway and I went jogging together. That's how far apart the what happened here was. This is not a situation where there was some kind of clandestine tampering, kind of thing going on. It was just John Elway golfs a lot, and he golfs with a lot of people. He runs in those circles. And John Elway goes golfing with famous people all the time. I mean, he was literally golfing with Michael Jordan last week. That's not me saying he was literally golfing with Michael Jordan last week.
And it's not impossible to say he'd run into any number of current NFLers. And are we going to all of a sudden cry tampering every single time he runs in and shakes somebody's hand that happens to be running into him on the course?
Right. Does tampering occur in the NFL from time to time? Absolutely.
Of course it does. But you can't prove
have the Broncos
most of the
at some point been guilty of that? Probably. Is this a case of that? Not even close. The Broncos didn't engage in any talks with Green Bay about Aaron Rodgers until after the draft. They called Green Bay to see if he was available. Green Bay reiterated he wasn't, and they went on from there. They did not have any official talks with the Green Bay Packers at all. So the other reports coming from back at the draft out of the Denver media market talking about a deal was all but done, never even got off the ground. They hadn't even had a conversation.
News to the two teams.
News to both teams. Yeah. Right. A lot of the information that came out was leaked out from David Dunn, who was Aaron Rodgers' agent. A lot of the information that's out there right now has come directly from that side of the house, voicing Aaron Rodgers' displeasure. And you can, I think, if most people who haven't or are tuned into pro sports can probably tell by the nature and the framing of what was been released on this so far that is accurate. Can tell by how it's framed what side of the house it came from. But to get back to the golfing report, John Elway golfs all the time. Aaron Rodgers golfs all the time. They happen to meet on the same course. One of those, you like playing? Yeah, you like playing? Oh, John Elway had forgotten about it. Didn't even remember it when it was brought up recently when somebody called around to ask about it.
Of course. And so, I think that kind of clears it up a little bit. That obviously was sort of setting Twitter on fire earlier today, and especially once the Pat McAfee show got a hold of it, and they kind of ran with it. And that's kind of one of those things that is tough about social media, where we take the information that we get kind of on face value sometimes, and all it has to be is kind of tweeted by a couple of people. Like you said, you go all the way back to this one account that tweeted that out, and they eventually even changed their name. So it's not exactly the most legit or concrete. And all of a sudden, people are taking that and saying, okay, well, I've read this in places, and I heard it from somebody else. So there's got to be more smoke here.
And you know how this is. People
Right.
build on things. First it was, because that initial tweet just says someone spotted them at the same golf course. From that it was originally called Alicia NFL Talk. Now it's called My Sports Update 5 on Twitter, and you can go back and look at it. You guys can find it. And that's the original tweet. And then as this story wears on, they were spotted on the same course too. They were playing too. They were in a foursome together, and then there was a wild night of poker or something. And it's that's how these things grow.
But it's important here that the facts are what they are, because if they did really play 18 holes together, considering everything else that's going on right now,
there would be something to lead into that.
There would be something there, and the NFL would levy some substantial penalties against the Broncos in this case for tampering, because that would be something that's easily tracked. I can't imagine John Elway, or really a lot of GMs or former GMs, especially if they're still with the organization, like John is still technically with the organization, putting themselves in that kind of an actionable position.
Right.
Like, you'd know better. Like, you'd know people would see you out there playing 18 holes with this dude.
At a high-profile golf course like that.
Yeah, you can be you can be friends with people.
Right.
But you got to understand that there's some optics here. So running into somebody, shaking their hands, I'm sure that's happened hundreds of times with current NFLers. It just so happens under the current situation and circumstance with Aaron Rodgers and all of the rumors pointing to the Broncos as the team that's most likely to get him. You watch Vegas odds and everything. That is why this situation, I think, carried more weight than usual.
Yeah. And again, this occurred back in February, by the way, guys. This wasn't something that happened a couple of weeks ago. This isn't, because that's been kind of put out there that, that the time frame on this thing has changed depending on who you asked. It happened back in February. And again, they just bumped into it. This happens. Celebrities bump into each other at places. It happens.
Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, George Chahrouri from Pro Football Focus joins us. We're going to talk about how they ranked Drew Lock really low, but there's a room for improvement. We'll get to it next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Here are Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Johnny here with George Chahrouri with Pro Football Focus. Let's move on to the Broncos here and talk about this article from Sam Monson, the unlikely case that Drew Lock can be the answer for the Broncos. And I understand from Pro Football Focus's standpoint, these are tough articles to write because, my goodness, he's the worst quarterback in the league. It's very clear by the PFF numbers. To even make this case, I bet he basically was just red in the face the entire time trying to come up with stats. But you guys did come up with a stat in here, and I kind of liked it. You were talking about how his big-time throw rate was 6.4%, which ranks 7th in the league. And you guys actually, Sam specifically, point to that as a stat that really does matter as it relates to quarterbacks and what we think of them. So why does that stat matter for Pro Football Focus so much?
Well, it's interesting. And when you're looking, there's a difference between looking at young quarterbacks and quarterbacks who you have a lot of data on and their sample size is relatively high, and therefore you know more about them. When a quarterback is younger, you are more likely to turn into something big if you show signs of, those big things. And even though that's something that generally is not stable from season to season, it gives you hope. And the person that I'll point to in that regard is Josh Allen. Now, Josh Allen, in his first 2 seasons in the NFL, was the lowest graded quarterback from a clean pocket. I'm not, fudging that in any way, like legitimately 32 of 32. And what he showed was a ability to make great throws down the football field. Now, he didn't do it often enough on average to outbalance some of the bad throws, but ultimately was able to overcome that last year. And we'll see what this year looks like. I think it obviously could be great. And I think that's what gives you some of that hope. Now, I'll also say this about Locke. His average depth of target, I want to say, was 10.1. It was the only quarterback in the NFL over 10 yards. The guy right behind him was Tom Brady, a little more efficient there. You saw the same thing with Josh Allen. His average depth of target way higher in his first 2 years. It's like always trying to play hero ball. And last year, even though he had a much more efficient year, and probably people wouldn't connect this in their minds, his average depth of target came way down. He threw a lot more short intermediate passes that were accurate. And so to me, that would be the key, actually taking less chances downfield, but in doing so, giving yourself more shots, to sustain drives and ultimately make those big throws where they can count.
I've always compared Drew Lock to Derek Carr as a player. And I feel like in terms of skill set, tools, where he came from, all those kinds of things, that he kind of has that trajectory to him. The question is whether or not they're going to get him the stability to be in an offense long enough to get it kind of the way Carr has. And this will be his second year in the Pat Shurmur offense. Do you see shades of that, or am I way off base?
It's so interesting because I think you're making a very a traits-based argument. I think, and I would say that could very well be the case. The way they're playing is bizarro David Carr, bizarro Drew Lock. They're on a completely opposite end of the spectrum to start their career, right? It's Derek Carr won't throw the ball downfield, and there's just no way that he will push the ball downfield, and Drew Lock won't do anything but push the ball downfield. And it's eventually both of them are going to move back towards the average, and in doing so, will both find parts of their game that they didn't early on that they need to in order to be successful. So I would say from a mathematical standpoint, I don't see a ton of that. I'll say the one place that I do a little bit is they don't take a lot of sacks. And that is something, I think we've talked about it before. That's something that is a quarterback trait. It's something that's very sticky for quarterbacks, regardless of how good their offensive line is. Quarterbacks taking sacks is a lot on the quarterback.
Yeah, no question. Last one here for you. And it's always good having you on, George, even if we're joking around a little bit about PFF and their dislike for the Broncos. It's not true, but we keep saying it. Maybe it'll become true.
Dislike is such a strong word. Hatred, really.
Hatred, just blind hatred. Courtland Sutton, I feel like this is appropriate. You're on the show. We have to talk about, you guys went and ranked the 32 best wide receivers, and Courtland Sutton showed up as 28th on this list. Now, that's not too surprising. He missed most of last year. I know a lot of us expected that he would have taken a big leap last year, especially after the promise he showed in the prior year, the 2019 season. But he does seem like a guy that is positioned well to make a big jump. How big a jump do you think he could make?
Well, he was a top 10 graded receiver before he went down. I think a second year of that would, definitely put him in that conversation, at the end of the year in terms of ranking the guys out. And I think he's in a better position to grade, to have a top 10 season than he was the year he had one, because they have other threats on the offense and a quarterback that, presumably will understand the offense a little bit better. So I think a top 10 season is certainly, would be the kind of jump back that I would be hoping for. Top 10, top 15, certainly doable. And if he does that, that offense, those weapons can be really, really dangerous.
George, really good chatting with you, my friend. We'll get you back on next week. Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, how big of a leap could Drew Lock take? We will discuss and break down coming up next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Here are Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
I want to get into this article from Sam Monson, and he talks about how Drew Lock can potentially make a big leap this next year. He says the unlikely case that Drew Lock can be the answer for the Denver Broncos. And he makes the tie to Josh Allen, right? We've talked about this, and some people, especially in the Stack community, kind of groan every time you tie Drew Lock to Josh Allen. But from Pro Football Focus's standpoint, okay, from their standpoint, they actually are very much aligned, because statistically, Josh Allen for the first couple of years was that quarterback. He was the guy that people were wondering if he'd ever get there. And he just had this kind of magical, light came on moment from year 2 to year 3, and statistically, he made a massive jump. Now, the reason I think a lot of people don't really like that comp is because Josh Allen was electric on the field with his running ability. Like what he was able to do to buy time or to scramble or to even run into the end zone was something that Drew Lock has some ability to, but he has not shown that just yet. So I can understand why the frustration is there. But the thing about it is, and even with Pro Football Focus listing Drew Lock as 32 out of 32 of quarterbacks, which, by the way, shouldn't be that big a surprise because Pro Football Focus statistically hasn't loved Drew Lock since he came into the league. So none of that should be a surprise. The thing about this is, as they sort of tie this all together, it's not that far of a reach, right? We were talking about average depth of the target earlier. He was around 10. Lock was around 10. For the first half of the season, he was over 10. Guess what? In his final 5 games, he was 8.6.
Well, and that's a reason he's so low in all the Pro Football Focus ratings or metrics or whatever, is because Pro Football Focus values efficiency above all else. And the easiest way to be efficient is to sit there and dink and dunk and hit the easy shots.
Right.
Where Drew Lock had the highest average depth of target in the NFL. He was taking the most vertical shots in the NFL, and by definition, it was going to be tougher to be more efficient doing that.
But he got down to the 8.6 range, which, by the way, was some of the top quarterbacks in the league. That's right around, that's a little bit of the sweet spot, isn't it?
It really is. And that's kind of where you need to be, a little bit more of the balance. And they started running that dagger concept a lot toward the end of the year. And it worked. He just, it simplified things, made him easier for him, simplified things for some receivers that were struggling, made it easier for them.
There's a stat here that I wanted to get to. We got to one with George Chahrouri, but I wanted to get to this stat here. That Drew Lock has a 4.5% turnover-worthy play rate. And that is 35th in the NFL out of 42 quarterbacks. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, that's the problem right there.
Interestingly enough, Josh Allen was at 5.1% when he first started. 5.1%. He got better by 0.8% the next year and the year after that. He was able to improve that over time. So Drew Lock has to improve that almost immediately. Like that just can't be the case. He tied for the lead. He led the league in interceptions last year, but he could have even had more. And that's kind of what Pro Football Focus tracks. They not only track the turnovers you do have, they track the turnovers you could have had because, listen, a DB drops a possible interception, right? I mean, it happens all the time. But the fact is you did still throw that ball. It still could have been an interception, and those should be tracked. So 4.55% puts him at 35th in the league. That has to improve substantially. 4 things they point to as the traits for a high-level quarterback. You ready? Big play ability, decision-making and capacity to limit mistakes, accuracy and efficiency, and then rushing dimension. Our 4 traits, I want to ask you about those 4 traits. Do you think that Drew Lock could exhibit and maybe master?
Well, I don't think he's a great runner, but he uses his feet to manipulate the pocket and buy time. You'll notice, and George mentioned it when we were talking to him earlier, the incredibly low sack rate that Drew Lock has. And you go back and look, he had the same offensive line Joe Flacco had that year. Drew just knows how to move the pocket. He knows how to do that. He's not a great runner. You ever watch him run? He looks like a newborn giraffe trying to run. He's really not a great runner.
But I feel like the big playability is something that
he's got the big arm.
Yeah.
He can make the big plays. He can do that. The decision making is kind of where we need to, but that comes with experience. The more experience you get, the more you're like, I don't need to go for the home run. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. And when you have guys that are young, they've kind of run around and made big plays in college. And they used their athleticism and their arm. They threw it up for grabs, and they probably had one receiver. It was better than all the other corners out there, and make a play on the ball.
But certainly there were times, and especially we saw in the Patriots game, where he's just chucking it deep, and he's throwing interceptions, and you're just going like, you don't need it. You already had the game. The game was won. But you're pushing the ball. You're pushing the envelope to a point where your decision-making will continue to become in question. And another reason why you need competition coming into camp.
Is that him, or is that a function of the offense and a mandate to throw deep? Because
it's a combo.
What are you doing throwing the ball even at that point?
That's a good point.
What were the Broncos doing throwing the football? They were trying to get Drew some extra reps, push the ball down the field, get him more comfortable with some of these different things. That's what they were trying to do. But put him in a bad spot. Just go win the game. Just go win the game. And they need to learn that. That's something they need to, they had to have hopefully gone back at the film and everybody's on the same page going into this year. Hey, we got to win football games. None of this, trying to get guys ready and all this kind of stuff. You're either ready to play, we're ready to win, or we're not.
Should be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how he has improved the mechanics and how that translates into what he can do on the field. Certainly, it kind of comes back to the whole point. Like, he's 32nd out of 32 possible quarterbacks for Pro Football Focus. He doesn't deserve to be higher than that. Mm-hmm. He hasn't done anything that should tell you one way or the other that he does deserve to be higher. I mean, even if we had, let's just, for argument's sake, say they put him at like 28th. Who cares?
Well, that's the thing. Drew has the better tools, and he has to come out and prove that the decision-making is fixed. And if he can do that, then he's got the edge. If he comes out and he's still making poor decisions with the football in training camp, and Teddy Bridgewater isn't, then Teddy Bridgewater's going to get the job. It's Drew's job to lose. I know we're billing this as a competition. I know we're billing this as, it's Drew's job to lose. Drew is QB1. Teddy Bridgewater's QB 1.5. And that's where we're at right now. Drew goes out there and showcases the improved decision-making, improved mechanics, and ability to take care of the football in addition to the other things that he brings to the table and stays healthy, then he's QB1. If he isn't, it's going to be Teddy Bridgewater's job, and they'll reassess at the end of the year.
Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight. Tune in to Broncos TV every weeknight at 6:30, right here on KTVD Channel 20.